and he will then moderate a panel discussion with some distinguished panelists to talk more about the legislation. Mr. Frank is the Executive Director of the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Boalt Hall. And before joining Berkeley, he served as California's Chief Deputy Attorney General for Legal Affairs. Perhaps most germane to our discussion, in 2006, Governor Schwarzenegger appointed Mr. Frank to the Delta Vision Task Force, which worked in 2007 and 2008 and provided some of the recommendations which then formed the basis of the legislation last year. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Frank.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's an absolute delight to be here, and time is short, so I won't spend much time in introductory remarks, but I do want to take just a moment to commend all the law students involved in putting this event together, not only this year, but in years past. I mean, as one of the faculty members from the Bay Area Law Schools that has the privilege to serve as an advisory committee, we are there to provide advice, but we speak when spoken to, kind of a reversal of roles. This is a student-run production, and the fact that they have filled the place, and there's a long waiting list, I think, testifies to their success and thought and sweat equity that they put into this. And the other part of this that, to me, is so gratifying to see is that this is a collaboration of 4 law schools and 4 sets of very busy students who are taking time away from their families, their pursuits, their studies, due to their collective love of water law and policy and willing to put the considerable amount of time together to do this. So for that, I think we all are grateful. Well, in the time we've got, we're going to do 4 things briefly. I'm going to give a very quick overview of the 5-bill package of legislation that was enacted by the legislature and signed into law with great fanfare by Governor Schwarzenegger in November. Then we have a very distinguished and expert panel from whom you're going to hear, and by discussions with them, we're going to limit their direct remarks to about 7 minutes apiece to give their own perspectives on the bill package. Then I will have a few questions I will pose to the panel designed to get some exchange and hopefully lively debate among the panelists. And then the fourth and perhaps most important part of the program, we will reserve some time for question and answer to continue the lively exchange that we've already seen this morning. All right. I can go fairly quickly through this, and Assemblymember Huffman and others have already alluded to some of the key points here. I have written a paper that's on your program CD, and one of the things I spend time on there, but I won't now, is on some of the impetus, collective impetus behind the legislation. But time doesn't permit me to go through that now, but let me just mention one item which is important and has not been mentioned, and that is my sense from the bleachers that Sacramento state government and political leaders had a collective desire and perceived need for a victory, a policy success. You'll recall that in 2009, most of the year was spent over a protracted debate and indeed bickering over a state budget that didn't ultimately resolve until August. As a result of that and other issues, you see the governor standing in the polls plummeting, the only public officials with a lower collective status in the polls, according to California residents, and the governor is the legislature. And my sense is there was a strong belief by legislators and the governors that they had to spend the last part of 2006 formulating individually or collectively a political success, a substantive accomplishment around which they could rally. And that would, more than anything else, was the political catalyst, if you will, for the legislation that emerged in November. All right, and I guess this is the subtitle to my talk, 2009 legislative process, not quick, not pretty, but ultimately effective in generating some legislation. And whether the legislation ultimately is worth the candle and the effort is for you individually and collectively to judge. 5 bills were enacted. The substantive centerpiece, and particularly with respect to Delta and water governance issues, which after all is the substance and theme of this conference, is SB1, co-authored by State Senator Simidian and President Pro Tem of the State Senate, Darrell Steinberg, primarily but not exclusively focusing on Delta governance. That's the bill about which I'll be spending most of my limited time talking. The financial centerpiece that has been alluded to by a couple of prior speakers, SB2, the Water Bond Act, Third, Sv6, which is a more narrow provision also mentioned by Assemblymember Huffman relating to groundwater monitoring. Sv7, dealing with a statewide water conservation policy, the first time that's been codified in any comprehensive form in the political history of the state. And finally, Sv8, dealing primarily, although not exclusively, with water rights system reform. All right, turning to Sb1. And again, as Ian pointed out, I'm not Switzerland in this debate. I did play a role on the Delta Vision Task Force, and from my perspective, one of the things that was particularly gratifying was that virtually all of the broad thematic policy recommendations contained in the Delta Vision Task Force's recommendations to the governor and the legislature in 2007-2008 found their way into the Delta legislation, mostly in the legislative findings and statement of purpose contained in SB1. Foremost among those, as you heard, and you'll hear throughout the day, this codification of the principle that I think started with the task force, that restoration of the Delta ecosystem and the preservation of a reliable California water supply are co-equal policy goals. The other one, and I see my professor Hap Dunning here in the audience, so Hap, you taught me well some 40 years ago that the public trust doctrine and California's reasonable use doctrine are the cornerstones, the foundation of California water policy, and are particularly relevant and important with respect to the Delta. Substantively, as you've heard, the key governance reform, not the only one to be sure, but the key one is the creation of a 7-member Delta Stewardship Council to bring a centralized state-level governance model to the Delta, and I'll come back to that in a moment in more detail. Significant revisions to the 1992 legislation creating the Delta Protection Commission, a regional land use body set up composed of state and local officials as well as agricultural interests. Some significant changes to that commission, primarily reducing its membership, the number of commissioners, from 23 to 15, and largely by reorienting that commission as a governmental entity more responsive to and intended to be a more focused spokesperson on behalf of local and regional governments and agriculture in the Delta planning and land use process. Creation of a new Delta Conservancy, whose primary role will be to oversee and coordinate the very challenging Delta ecosystem restoration efforts that are planned and are absolutely necessary to bring some degree of ecological viability back to a Delta that is now severely strained. 11 voting members of the Conservancy, 6 appointed by state officials, 5 representing local government, 2 ex officio members representing the California Assembly and State Senate. And then creation of a new Delta Water Master, a new position that would be appointed by the Delta Stewardship Council, but an interesting governance reform because it really is designed primarily to implement the water quality and water allocation goals set forth by not only the Stewardship Council but also by the Water Board, the State Water Board, and primarily the Water Board, to be the implementer of state water policy affecting the Delta and in the Delta. And finally, SB1 articulates a number of so-called early actions that are important to realizing the perceived goals behind the overall Delta legislation. Among the most important are creation of a new Delta Independent Science Board that will have independent status but will provide hopefully unbiased and quality science scientific advice to all decision makers at the state level regarding Delta and water policies. This consists of a maximum of 10 scientists appointed by the Delta Stewardship Council. You've already heard about the State Water Board's key role imposed upon it by the legislature to, within 9 months, develop flow criteria for the Delta ecosystem. And if there are any reporters in the room, if you missed it, the first political event, if I can step out of character, Jared Huffman called out the Water Board to take a view of that proceeding that he believes is in line with the legislative intent. An interesting question is be whether and what extent the Water Board, in what is a very difficult and challenging time frame of 9 months, is able and willing to do that. And then there are other early actions as well. All right, turning back to the Stewardship Council, 7 members, a 7-member body, 1 member by virtue of his or her office as chair of the Delta Protection Commission, that local, largely locally dominated body that pre-exists, will have a seat on the Delta Stewardship Council. That is the only enumerated or specified seat. Then you have 4 other members that are appointed by the governor, and 1 each by the Senate Rules Committee and the Speaker of the California Assembly. Its key short and medium term obligation is to, within the next 2 years, or certainly by January 1, 2012, to develop a comprehensive plan for the Delta that achieves the various policy objectives so carefully set out in the substance of SB1. And that will also be a challenging process. I guess the best analogy that I can offer here, it was the early requirement of the California Coastal Commission to adopt a coastal plan for the 1,100-mile coastline, and a similar process by which the San Francisco Bay Conservation Development Council was required to come up with a plan for San Francisco Bay. Once that plan is completed, the Delta Stewardship Council has so-called consistency review of certain of local and state covered actions, and that's an important term of art, to determine if appeals are brought before it, whether a particular action of a state or local governmental entity is consistent with the council adopted Delta plan. There are some important exemptions to the scope of that consistency authority. Specifically, state regulatory decisions, such as by the State Water Board, are not covered by, are explicitly exempted from the Stewardship Council's consistency review authority. The other key point is the end game under the statute is less than certain, perhaps some creative ambiguity, because the Stewardship Council does not have the explicit authority to veto or block a state or local covered action from going forward, but simply to declare through its bully pulpit function that in its view, the proposed activity is inconsistent with the plan. What happens then if the state or local government action proceeds with its covered action remains very much a mystery and a subject of some speculation. And then various other important duties that we don't have time to get into, but those are the key rules. All right, moving from SB1, the governance centerpiece of the Delta, to SB2, financial component. You've heard already about the bond, $11.14 billion general obligation bond act that will be on the November ballot for all of you registered voters to review. That bond act, of course, does not take effect until and unless a majority of California's voters approve it. That, by the way, raises an important distinction. The other 4 bills that I'll be talking about this morning, including the governance bill that I just finished covering, all take effect next week. They take effect next week and remain in effect, as Assemblymember Huffman mentioned, regardless of whether or not the voters approve or reject the water bond. All right, what are the purposes of the water bond? It is a veritable Christmas tree of objectives: drought relief, Delta sustainability, water supply reliability, water storage improvements, parenthetically the largest single component of the water bond at $3 billion, groundwater protection and groundwater quality protection, water recycling, water conservation efforts, watershed protection. Those are all key purposes and pieces, financial pieces of that $11.1 billion bond act are allocated for those purposes. I've mentioned the voter approval component. The fact that, again, critically important, for most of the debate in 2007, these bills were double joined. By that I mean that the substantive bills about which we're talking today would have been dependent for their effectiveness upon passage of the bond act. The bills were decoupled, and as has been mentioned, those bills have full force and effect beginning next week, regardless of what happens to the Bond Act, which was a key political development, however you feel about the efficacy of the bill package. Key issues over the Bond Act that you will hear between now and November 2nd, and don't have the time to go into them, it's not my role, but just to tee up the issues that are largely likely to play prominently in the political debate over SB2, the water bond, is concerned over whether it's appropriate to take on, in a time where the state is fiscally scrapped, over $11 billion of additional general fund bonded indebtedness. This whole issue of taxpayer support for a system of ecosystem remediation and water improvements versus a user pay model, which is appropriate public policy. This issue, again, alluded to by Assemblymember Huffman, of the water privatization issue, that some private entities could have an ownership share in some of the water improvements that would be authorized under this bond and have partial operational control over them. That's likely to play a big issue. And finally, this Christmas tree of various projects and benefits that the Assemblymember referred to, that on their own, many of these are very worthwhile, but query whether they belong in the Bond Act, and they were, let me just state it very plainly, they were the political incentive designed to obtain the necessary number of Republican and Democratic votes from reluctant or skeptical state legislators from around the state, that certain benefits designed for environmental quality in particular districts, many of which are a long, long way from the Delta and the Delta watershed, that's in there, and that is likely to come up as well, our own state earmark issue and set of issues. Okay, moving on quickly, and I'll deal with the other three bills quite quickly. Sv6, Groundwater Monitoring. As has been mentioned by David Sandino and others, we don't currently have a system in place for regulation of groundwater rights at the state level or groundwater monitoring. A modest first step, as has been mentioned, Sv6 requires the monitoring and reporting of groundwater basin elevations. That's an important distinction. We're not talking about the volumes of water pumped out of groundwater basins by individual extractors. That efforts in that regard did not make it out of the legislative process. So we're talking about aggregate levels of particular groundwater basins, whether they're going down or going up. That's what's required. The monitoring reporting is contemplated to be done by local agencies, water agencies, and other local agencies that agree to do so. The default, if they don't step up and do that for particular regional groundwater agencies, David Sandino gets to do it. The Department of Water Resources is the default agency to whom this monitoring obligation falls if no local agency agrees to do it. And DWR, more positively, I guess, has an obligation for the aggregate collection and reporting of groundwater elevation data that will be forthcoming as a result of this legislation. SB7 rather, dealing with water conservation. This legislation partially codifies Governor Schwarzenegger's executive action directing statewide per capita water use reduction through conservation measures by 20% as of the year 2020, something comparable to the guidelines that you've seen in AB 32 with respect to greenhouse gas emission reductions. He seems to like 2020 as a benchmark, and 20% reduction seems to resonate. Specifically, this bill imposes this quantitative reduction on urban water districts and imposes an interim goal by 2015 of a 10% reduction. Assemblymember Huffman stated it more gently than I will. There was an effort among many people to impose the same quantitative limits on California legislature. That was not successful. Instead, agriculture has qualitative requirements to adopt efficient water management practices and water management plans, but without a quantitative water use conservation target. For both urban and agricultural sectors, the sanction for non-compliance with these efforts is that those agricultural or urban districts would be made ineligible for state water loans or grants, including much of the money, if SB2, the water bond passes, would bring into play. Finally, SB8, the water rights reform measure, again, quite modest as it turns out compared to some of the original bills that were being advocated both during the regular and the extraordinary session in this past fall. In its current form, SB8 expands the reporting obligations of surface water diverters to report their water diversions to the State Water Resources Control Board and DWR, and eliminates an important and controversial pre-existing exemption of in-delta diverters who now have to report their surface water diversions. There was a lot of testimony in the legislature and also before Delta Vision that the State Water Board staff lacked the resources to thoroughly and competently implement California's existing system of water rights. To address that, the legislature has created 25 new State Board staff positions specifically designed to enforce the water rights system. And again, some financial provisions. It funds about $500 million from previously approved bond acts, 1E and 84, for various Delta ecosystem and water system reliability programs. So with that very quick overview, let me then invite our panelists to come forward, and they will tell you how it happened, why it happened, and what the future portends. And while they're getting seated, I will introduce them. Seated or soon to be seated to my immediate right is Mariko Yamada, who represents California's 8th Assembly District, which importantly includes 10 cities in Solano and Yolo counties and large areas of the California Delta, including Suisun Marsh, the Yolo Bypass, and about a third of the Delta's primary zone, a key jurisdictional component of the Delta Protection Commission's jurisdiction. Assemblymember Yamada serves on the Assembly Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, the Assembly Agricultural Committee, and the Select Committee on Regional Approaches to Addressing the State Water Crisis. Before being elected to the State Assembly, she served with distinction for 5 years on the Yolo County Board of Supervisors, and she, I think it's fair to say, was a strong and forceful voice in the 2009 debate for in-Delta and local interests in terms of the governance issues we'll be discussing. To the Assembly member's right is Kate Poole. Kate is a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council here in San Francisco and litigation director of NRDC's water program. She serves as NRDC's lead counsel in what now is colloquially called the Wanger litigation, the litigation involving the water supply systems, water projects, and the Federal Endangered Species Act, presided over by Judge Oliver Wanger in Fresno, which have reformed the operations of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. She also directs other litigation efforts on behalf of NRDC's water program, including efforts to restore the San Joaquin River and ensure that long-term contracts for the diversion and use of California's rivers comply with environmental and natural resource protection laws. To Kate's right is Tim Quinn. Tim Quinn is the Executive Director of the Association of California Water Agencies, better known by the acronym ACWA, a statewide association whose 450 local public water agency members are responsible for about 90% of all of the water delivered in California. Tim has more than 22 years of experience in California water issues. Before taking the leadership reins at ACWA, Tim served with distinction as Deputy General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and along with two or three other people, I think is personally and directly responsible for what I would characterize as a rather dramatic reinvention of the Metropolitan Water District, which is a very different agency now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Last but not least, we have Alf Brandt, who for the past 5 years has served as principal consultant for the California State Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife, and in that capacity, Alf had quite literally a front row seat for the Delta legislative debates that transpired over the last year. Is an expert on a number of water and resource policy issues. Before being a consultant to the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, Alf was Assistant Regional Solicitor at the U.S. Department of Interior, based in Sacramento, so he has a federal perspective that he brings to this. And he also served as, at one point in his career, as the youngest ever appointed director to the Metropolitan Water District. And I would be remiss as a member of the Berkeley Law faculty if I failed to mention that he is an alum, proud alum of UC Berkeley School of Law. So I should know this as moderator, but I've asked each of our panelists to spend about 7 minutes on a direct presentation, and I'm not sure which order we want to go in. We're being overly polite. Assemblymember Yamada.
Yeah, protocol would dictate.
No, actually, I think I would prefer to go last.
All right. Uh-oh. Okay, so we're going to have reactions to us. Uh-oh. I'll be careful with it. Do you want to start? Okay. Well, I want to focus on the future. You've heard some good presentations. Both Rick and my boss, Jared Huffman, made some good presentations on kind of what we did. So that's kind of done now. So I'm going to focus and really what's the challenges that we face ahead, because I think that's probably the most important part of the discussion that you're going to hear today, where we need to go. And I've got some good news. No, it's not the good news that Jared shared, which is the legislature fixed everything. But it is the good news, particularly for those law students who are looking to, maybe they want to do water. The good news is there's going to be a lot of opportunity out there. And the things that I think I want to identify are the things and the challenges that we face are the things that lawyers are good at. And those things are relationships and decisions, and helping craft how to build those relationships, whether it's legal relationships or otherwise. And legal may be a piece of it, may be the start of it, and we've perhaps crafted pieces of that in the legislation of these relationships. But it's going to be challenged to how to really build a complete relationship, more than just the legal piece. A lot of things ahead. And then the other piece is making decisions and using all the things that the law that we're required to make any public decisions, use all those things. So those are opportunities, I think, for law students, and so I'm encouraged. On relationships, I think the number one challenge we have, and I think you may even hear it a little bit here today in our panel, is building relationships, building back relationships with all those, particularly the opponents of the legislation, all those in the Delta. We can't really make the kind of changes and improve the Delta without them participating in one way or another. That's really going to be a challenge. And at the end, they were not happy. A lot of the county supervisors and some of the in-Delta folks, they were not happy with the package as it came out. But we need to overcome that. We need to overcome and rebuild a relationship, because it's not going to happen if all we have in the Delta are the people who want to make it undermine it. So that's going to be one of the huge challenges. And I think there are opportunities. We created places where there might be ways to develop it. I mean, the Delta Protection Commission changes. We're focused on having it as the local voice. The membership is more concentrated on being people representing in the Delta. It took away a lot of the state members of the DPC. How do we build those relationships between DPC and the new council and all the other players that are going to be doing it? Delta Conservancy, that's where we had 5 Delta County supervisors on the Delta Conservancy. All those kinds of relationships, we may have set the direction and given some direction, but really it's going to be building that relationship that's going to be key. And then how does the Delta Stewardship Council work with all the agencies, whether they're the existing ones like the Delta Protection Commission, resources agencies like Department of Water Resources or Fish and Game, but also regulators as well, State Water Board. That's going to be a challenge. We have taken out of the definition of what we call covered actions for what the council can look at, regulatory actions. And so that means they can't be, the Delta Council can't review regulatory actions, but they're still going to be part of the play. How is that going to work out? I think that's going to be the huge challenge. And the big question that I think Mr. Huffman and others have raised today, how's the federal government going to tie in with this? We've seen some encouraging signs, and you heard a little bit about that from Mr. Huffman. But they're just starts. And I want to encourage, I hope that the federal government, and I think this is a discussion within the federal family where I used to be a member and I used to be the regional agency coordinator for CalFed. But I think that's going to be a challenge. Are they going to be following our lead? Are they willing to do that? That's not something that the federal government generally does. We got some encouraging news in the December report saying we're here, we're ready to be a partner, but it may take Congress and others to work through how this goes. Are they going to follow our process? How are they going to participate in the in-stream flow criteria? All those kinds of things. Yes, the federal law requires them to do anything that the state board tells them to do, tells the Bureau of Reclamation operating the Central Valley project, but how is that going to be? Are we going to see them follow it? And how are they going to participate in developing those in-stream flows? How are they going to participate in developing whatever comes out of the BDCP? So that's going to be a huge challenge, and I look forward to seeing the federal government, and it's good to see David Nowie here listening to me and going, Anyway, David Nowie is Secretary's representative out here in California, and so good to see him. And the last piece is decisions. We've got some tough decisions. You know the legislature didn't make it. The legislature's not set up to make those kinds of detailed decisions. They don't have the time. We have term limits with 6 years, no more than 6 years in the Assembly, no more than 8 years in the Senate, all those kinds of things. They're not able to make the detailed decision of exactly how it's going to be done. It takes the agencies, and it's going to take science. How are we going to incorporate science? How are we going to do adaptive management? How are we going to make those kinds of decisions? In the record of decision in 2000 in CalFed, we said we were committed to adaptive management. But when it came down to it and we had a crisis, we just couldn't adapt. And there were decisions that couldn't be made for a whole range of reasons that went on there. But it's going to take that collaboration and development, working with scientists. It's not about, as I've been concerned partly in the in-stream flow criteria, it's not about lawyers fighting each other to figure out what the best answer. Litigation is not the best answer in making decisions. It's not always the most effective way to do it. We're going to make some tough calls, and the state as a whole is going to have to make some trade-offs, and going to have to set some priorities. We've taken a step in that direction, but it's really going to be a challenge to see where that goes. That's the challenge that we face ahead, and I think that's the important thing, and I look forward to hearing what my other panelists, my fellow panelists talk about, because I think that's where we need to focus. We've done what we've done. We've got to make it work, and that's our challenge ahead, and I hope all of you will be engaged in that process. Oftentimes Senator Steinberg said last year, now is the time for the legislature. Well, that was right last year, but that time is gone. Now is the time for all of you.
All right, thank you, Alf. Tim?
My goal is to not use anywhere near my 7 minutes. I want to get to your questions. Let me take a few minutes just to drive home that my industry, there's no mistaking the fact that this is really big change, and it's really hard. I went to my board of directors on a Sunday night, pulled them together on the phone. I knew I was getting myself into trouble. I asked them to support the package that Senator Steinberg had told me he was going to take to the Senate floor the next day. They voted to do so, not unanimously, not without great rancor. This is hard change, but necessary change, and hopeful change. The legislatures don't solve problems, but they sometimes can give you a framework, a policy framework that gives you a better chance to solve the problems than you had before, and I believe that they did that, leaving huge obstacles that we still have to get over. It's very noteworthy that after considerable rancor and debate, which I'm working on, my job is I represent 450 agencies, public agencies, all, by the way, not a single one of them not-for-profit. Joint powers authorities are good things, not bad things. Tony.
Yes, they are.
But and they all agree with each other all the time, so my job is really, really easy. But part of what I view my role is to identify where is the friction happening, where is the conflict happening, and can you resolve that conflict around core common values and policy goals, and I believe we have that today, at least from the complexities of the water industries. It's also notable that NRDC supported the very same legislation that Aqua supported. This is not just the southern guys that we're going to pay them off to get whatever they needed in the Delta. This is the entire state establishment of water realizing we have to go in a different direction than we have been going in the past. And at its core, what I think this legislation is about, by the way, yes, we have a system that we built when there were 18 million people, and there will be 50 million people in the future. I do not view that as the core problem we're solving. It's an important problem. We're operating a system that was designed when the environmental rules emphasize extraction at low cost of resources for economic development. I don't say that that was bad. Those were the rules of the game. The rules of the game have changed considerably. They now emphasize valuing the ecosystem in and of itself. They emphasize sustainability of that ecosystem. We need sustainability for our economy too. I love Phil Eisenberg has got it down to a license plate, co-equal, with Rick, Frank, and other people's help. And that is a common sense change, yes. It's been happening over the last 25 years at least, I would argue. But this legislation codifies it. It says our policy goal is co-equal goals. That's never been true in the past. And we will still be arguing 25 years from now what that really means. But I'd rather be having that debate than the debate that we've been having for the last 10 or 20 years. So I see here a framework for hope. I see huge problems. One of my small goals, listening to Jared, listening to Rick, is to convince you that you don't want to and you don't have to sacrifice your agricultural economy or any other part of your economy to get co-equality. If in fact that is your mindset, you're not on the co-equal train, and we need to get you on the co-equal train. But we're committed to working together to make that happen, even though we know that the legislature did this, and now we've got to do this, so let's get busy and do it. I don't think I'm anywhere near 7 minutes.
Thank you, Tim. Kate Poole.
I'd like to start out by quoting something that Dr. Steve Lindley said earlier this week. Dr. Lindley is one of the fish biologists with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and in describing the Bay Delta situation to the National Academy of Sciences panel that's looking into Bay Delta water management, he said the following: "The Bay Delta situation is like an airplane being flown by 3 pilots in the cockpit, each with a set of controls. And the cabin is full of angry passengers who bought tickets to different destinations." It's really a perfect description of the situation
We
we're
can
in
quit now. Now
California.
we've discussed Delta governance. We can all go home.
And there are probably many different interests that could fit the bill as those 3 pilots at any one time in Bay Delta management. But one of the remarkable things about the water policy package that we're talking about today, and I'm not talking about the bond when I refer to the water policy package, was that one subset of those 3 pilots that have been fighting each other for years over water policy came together in support of this package. And that was a group of environmentalists, not all environmentalists, but NRDC and EDF and some of the other groups that have been heavily involved in water policy issues over the years. Urban water interests, most notably the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and agricultural water interests. Tim represents both of those subsets, but the Westlands Water District, which NRDC has been at loggerheads with for years, also supported this package. That's a pretty remarkable statement, that those very disparate groups came together in support of this package. And I think that at the base, the reason that we all did so is because we all agreed strongly on one common principle, which is that the status quo of water management in California is unsustainable and needs to be changed in very fundamental ways. Now, Assembly Member Huffman and others have said that this legislation is not the panacea. It's not going to solve all of our problems. We've got a lot of work to do, but in my view, it is a very significant step in the right direction. And I'm going to just briefly describe 3 of those steps that I think are some of the most important. It imposes environmental safeguards that are critically important to restoring the Delta. A couple of those are the requirement for the State Water Board to make this public trust flow determination by August, which, it's quite remarkable that in all the years we've been discussing the Bay Delta and grappling with management issues, we haven't had a single state agency say, this is how much water we need in the Delta to restore the ecosystem. So that's the determination we're looking for from the State Board, and that's going to be a very significant step, I think, in helping drive management for years. One of the other key pieces of environmental requirements included in the legislation is that it imposed the highest restoration standard in state or federal law on efforts to build a new peripheral canal or isolated conveyance facility, whatever it is you want to call it. And that is the state NCCPA requirement, which requires restoration, not just life support, as we're on now basically under the Endangered Species Act. Second, I think the policy package does represent a fundamental paradigm shift away from how we've managed water in the West for the past century and a half. Instead of continuing down the path of looking for the next river to tap and the next freshwater ecosystem to sustain our growing needs for water, it requires us to look more closely at demand management. It requires that we reduce our dependence on the delta, and it says that we need to invest in alternative water supplies to meet our growing needs, things like improved conservation and efficiency, water recycling, stormwater capture and reuse, and better groundwater management. DWR's own studies have confirmed that if we invest in those measures, we can create enough new supply to match the maximum amount that we've ever exported out of the Delta. So there's a lot of potential out there. And third, the water efficiency bill that NRDC co-sponsored set a goal, as you've heard, of 20% reduction in water use for urban agencies by 2020, and requires agricultural water suppliers to adopt efficient water management standards. And this is the first bill in the country to set numeric per capita water efficiency targets for every urban water district. So that's quite a remarkable step, even if there were places where we would have liked to have seen that legislation go further. We did, in fact, have those same numeric requirements on agricultural districts in the bill as it was originally drafted, but those were written out as the compromise and process went down its path. With that, I think I'll stop and leave some more time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Assemblymember Yamada.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone, and I am very delighted to join you today because I believe I was invited to perhaps put a little bit of a different perspective on the process on the policy bills that were enacted and some of the politics involved. And as attorneys out there, I know that you're always looking for the alternate responsible view, and that's what I hope I will present to you today. I do have one admission that I did not share in my bio, although those of you, I know some of you have scoped me out, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a social worker by training. I have my graduate degree from USC, but don't hold that against me, those of you that are not on that side of the football equation, although they're not doing that well these years either. But my training really is to listen and to try to achieve change by addressing those who have been most disenfranchised in any discussion. And that's why I also wanted to go last today, because although I'm not a lawyer, I did participate in debate, and it's always an advantage to go last, right? Be able to address different issues. This package of water legislation that, this is the sum of really a whole year of a lot of hard work, anger, and angst, and will result in a lot of full employment for attorneys out there for years to come. So, I know, Alf, I had that encouraging word, but I know that's not why you're all here today. You're here because I think all of us, from granted differing perspectives, want to try to achieve a real change and stability in the water systems for California's future. And, we have this bottle of water here, of course, from Davis. These are banned at public events, so I want you to know that I can't drink out of this. But I often think that, we could solve our water problems in California if we did not have enough water to make coffee in the legislature. I think that things would get done a lot quicker, wouldn't they? But you know, what I want to convey to you just in a couple minutes, and I would like to also move to question and answers quickly as well, is that I think it should be an important note for those of you following this whole process that not a single Delta legislator has his or her name on any of these bills. And I think that's a message out there that although I think we are all you know, responsible representatives for our area, for some reason, which you know I'm not going to go into here, we were really not included in the process and the policy and the politics behind bringing these bills to fruition. Now, Alf may debate this point somewhat because, of course, he has served as staff person for many years under then Assembly Member Lois Wolk and now Senator Wolk. That you know there were some Delta legislators involved in the early discussions, but the whole process by which these bills finally came to fruition, you know, in a very what I would call stressful and suspect environment. You know, to make policy changes of this nature at 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I don't think should be the way we proceed in the future. Perhaps that was the only way this was actually going to get done. But I don't think that it speaks well for the institution, for the legislature. And I think I heard twice here on the panel that legislators do not have time or are really not there to solve problems. And I think that, you know, notwithstanding my own role here, does not speak well for the future of California. If we do not entrust the elected representatives of a particular area to represent their interests and their constituent interests in a way in which we can solve problems together, I think that speaks to much further reaching problems than just the water issue alone. So with that, you've heard a lot this morning, I think some very, very good descriptions and discussions about what the water bills actually do, the 4 of them that will go into effect on Thursday, February 4th. Those policy bills will, you know, go forward, notwithstanding what happens to the SB2 bond discussion in November. And you know, were there some good things in this legislation? Yes, there were indeed. But was it worth sort of disenfranchising a sector of the state that is going to be most affected by this legislation? I think we could do a little better job this next go-round. And I'm here to certainly pledge that kind of cooperation and openness and transparency that I think will go a lot further in truly achieving some significant change for water policy and you know, getting some of the politics out perhaps. Because we're all in this together. There really is only a finite amount of water available to us, and we have to learn to manage and share respectfully. So with that, I think I will conclude, and then we'll go into questions and see what else we can talk about. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask a few questions first, and then we'll, in a few minutes, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Let's start by talking a little more about politics, politics and water. The 2009 debate over the Delta and water legislation split a number of traditional alliances within the environmental community. For example, Environmental Defense Fund and your organization, Kate, the Natural Resource Defense Council, supported the legislation. The Planning and Conservation League and Sierra Club and some other organizations opposed it. As has been mentioned, legislative Democrats were split on the bill. Tim alluded to the fact that some of his water districts were very supportive of this package, and others were quite opposed. So my question is this: do you expect these political fissures, in many cases among traditional political alliances in the ongoing water wars, to be temporary and repairable, or are we on the leading edge of a newly developed political paradigm instead of political alliances?
I think my perspective, they will have to be, and I think that they will. And largely that depends on how these decisions go forward. In other words, we set a path, but what happens with the ultimate decisions and how those happen. And like I talked about the relationships, it's going to be a lot about how that works out and what's the relationship of DPC, for instance, within, between Democrats, between environmentalists, all those kinds of things. It's going to really depend on the decisions, but I think they will be healed over the long run.
You want to jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
Speaking for the environmental community, I think, many of these fissures already have healed. And Assemblywoman Yamada referred to the process, which, I don't think anybody who was involved in this liked the process that led up to this legislation. And I think that was a big source, sort of the fast-paced, ever-changing nature of this legislation was a big source of a lot of unhappiness and discontent within our various communities. But ultimately, I think that at least the environmental community agrees that there is a lot of good in here. We have a lot of work to do to implement it, and there's more to be done in terms of better and stronger legislation. But I do think that we'll all be working together to make those things happen.
Tim or Assemblymember Yamada?
Some of the fissures will heal and some of them won't. You can heal a fissure when your core policy objectives are in the future compatible with each other. Some folks are just trying to do this, and those fissures don't get healed necessarily. The trick is to find enough people in the center that want to solve the problems, and I believe we are taking very big steps in that. I don't expect to get pats on my back from some elements of the water community, and I don't think that Kate's going to get the same from some elements in the environmental community. But can we hold enough in the center that causes the Queen Mary to change direction? And again, I believe the direction of co-equal goals, whatever the hell that means, is the direction that we need to go in. In my own community, where the boat was rocking pretty good there for a couple months, it's still rocking to a degree, but a lot of the folks who are grabbing the rails and shifting their weight the hardest are, my job is to go out and sit down with them, find out what their concerns are, point to them that, well, maybe you didn't read this part of the legislation the way I'm reading it, but I think we just have to commit to working together and go through this ugly process. And I agree it's ugly, but that's not a new discovery. We did Tocqueville 150 years ago. Democracies are inherently sloppy ways to get things done, and they're just better than anything else.
I would say that sort of just the raw political power that was used to get this package completed in the waning hours of, let's say, well, of course, we were there for almost 24 hours in session on Friday, September 11th. I thought that was an interesting last day to deal with this, and then, of course, was not successful on that overnight stay. And then, of course, we came back to extraordinary session and found ourselves, I believe it was around Election Day, addressing these very issues. So, clearly the political dynamic and the tectonic plates, I call it the shifting tectonic plates of politics, were always in play. But, again, I just reiterate that without engaging those representatives and those communities and constituents who will be most directly affected by these changes, I think is a mistake. And unless there is some outreach to the Delta legislators who I think would stand ready to try to be of some assistance and to be navigators and ambassadors as these changes do come forward, unless that happens from the highest levels, we're just going to continue as aptly titled, I believe this workshop was titled, or this panel was titled, Water Wars. And, the last time there was a war between the North and the South in this country, the North won. And, I would, I would hope that we do not devolve into that kind of simplistic view of water. It's way too important for so many reasons. For, as I used once in a committee hearing. You know, we need enough water to farm, fish, and flush, and sort of in balancing the agricultural, industrial, commercial, and municipal needs, as well as I think I got dinged once about not making sure we have enough water to fight fires and to have fun, you know, for people to go fishing or boating. So you can use all those F words and think about how we're going to go forward and heal what truly remains a very difficult situation that many Delta legislators have been placed in. I also would have to say that the reality of legislative lynchings, you know, that is to say when you speak up or you are addressing what you believe to be the correct position for your area, your constituencies, and then are faced with other actions, you know, that has to stop as well. Otherwise, we are never going to engage in the transparent public policy debate that I think this state deserves.
Tim, you get the last word on this.
I do want to strongly support what you just heard from Assemblywoman Yamada. I have members in the Delta, above the Delta, below the Delta. None of my Delta members want to have tread marks on their back to solve an export problem for Southern California or an environmental problem for environmentalists. And we have not stepped up to that challenge yet. This was a part of the legislative process that I had serious problems with as well. For what it's worth, I was the chief deal maker for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, outside of Southern California, for about 20 years. And guess how many deals I closed with the argument that, well, the big city needs it? The answer is 0. If you want to do this in the Delta, you have got to have a partnership with the Delta and the people in the Delta. They have to look at it as something where they're getting a win. And if you don't get that, if you don't do that, you're not going to get your project done. It's really that simple. Somebody asked a question about all the Delta land. For most of it, on the environmental restoration side, what you have to do, you need to change land use practices in the Delta to have any hope of restoring natural functions. You don't have the power of eminent domain under California law. If you want to build a water supply infrastructure project, you've got the power of eminent domain, but you do not have the power of eminent domain for those restoration projects, and that means you need willing sellers, and you need a political environment in which they can step forward and be part of your team. We don't have that today, and we need to have that in the future.
Let's move quickly from the politics to the substance, and this is the soundbite portion of the program. I'm going to challenge each of our speakers in 1 minute apiece to very quickly and succinctly state from your perspective what's the single best element of the Delta bill package that was enacted and what was the single worst substantive element. Alf, let's start with you.
I need to think about the worst, but the best is simple. Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Plan, that combination together. It's the first time in history that we're bringing together the water and the land use and the on the levy decisions, all those things together into one comprehensive Delta Plan. And that comprehensiveness is key. Worst,
we'll get back to you on the
about
worst. Okay, Tim.
Best, commitment to co-equal goals. Worst, a challenge to Kate. You can't regulate the level of conservation you need. It's got to be an incentive-based program, and we will have to work on that.
Kate?
Well, it is an incentive-based program.
No. But working together, we can make it so.
The best, and you know, this is my short-term answer because I'm working on this now, and I think it's a vitally important piece, is this state board public trust flow requirement. It's just a key foundational piece that we've never had, and we've got to do quickly. The worst, I wouldn't say necessarily is a piece of the legislation, but misunderstandings about the legislation. A lot of people believe that this legislation authorized a peripheral canal, and it did no such thing. And in fact, we were, through the BDC process and other processes, more likely to end up with a bad peripheral canal before this legislation was passed than we are now. So it's unfortunate that that word has not gotten out more.
Well, let's see here. From someone who voted no on all of the bills for different reasons, let me just say that I think one of the better parts of the legislation for me personally, and also probably for my constituents, is this 20% goal that is now, in policy for water conservation. Did it go far enough? No, it did not. We all know that, but it's a start. The worst for me, which is somewhat counterintuitive to what my colleague Alf just mentioned, is the governance piece. I believe that the Delta Stewardship Council of 7 members, 4 of whom will be appointed by a governor that will be leaving soon, but whose legacy will continue from 4 to 6 years on, because those appointments will not change when he leaves. And then the 3 other members, although one will be Delta Protection Commission chair, really to me creates and cedes power to a non-elected but an appointed body over the single most important water source in California. And I worry about that, because I think it cedes that authority and takes that legislative oversight away. It's kind of, and with all due respect, although I know we're in a private university setting, it's kind of putting like a board of regents kind of governance structure over something that I think should have much more public oversight.
Okay, let's, if we had more time, and we don't, I would ask the question presaged by Kate, and that is make the point, the legislation is, I guess, ironic, you might say, conspicuous in its silence. It really doesn't overtly refer to peripheral canal, or as it's sometimes referred to in polite company, an alternate conveyance or an isolated facilities. And if we had more time, which we don't, I'd ask these folks, will such a canal be built, and should it? But I have a hunch, now that we're throwing it open to you, that same issue may come up. So this is your part of the program, and start with Professor Tim Duane.
This is a question about both your experience in the negotiations and also what your expectations may be down the line. Every speaker today has mentioned the co-equal goals as really fundamental, and it may manifest in particular forms, such as making the public trust doctrine the basis for thinking about flows or other decisions. And I'm reminded of the Federal Power Act. In 1986, the Electric Power Consumer Protection Act made protection of ecological goals a co-equal goal for the FERC. And it didn't seem to have a big effect in the first few years. And then the Edwards Dam came down. And one can point to that legislative change of a framework or criteria as the reason we have a potential deal on the Klamath. So I wonder if you can comment either on whether the FERC experience was directly considered in thinking about co-equal goals, or how you might see this playing out in the many myriad individual decisions over the next quarter century, so that maybe 25 years from now we'll look back and say, it wasn't about all the details, it wasn't about the governance form, it was about fundamentally changing what criteria we use to evaluate every decision we make.
Who wants to take that one on?
Well, you are too. Well, I don't have a good answer to your question. Let me start there. I'm the guy who is firmly committed to this thing that nobody knows what it means. In the context of the legislation, one of the most important jobs of the Delta Stewardship Council is to convene a process in which you answer that question, co-equal goals. I think it's I would, to turn your question around a little bit, just as it's important from an environmentalist perspective over the years to make sure that a system that was built around cheap power, cheap water, paid attention to environmental goals. We got a huge crisis going on where parts of our water supply system are being operated pretty much for fish these days. That's creating a crisis of no less proportion on the other side of the equation. And both of those are very, very dangerous till the ultimate goal of having both co-equal goals. One of my biggest concerns right now is that the political instability of trying to achieve co-equality within a system that is inherently incapable of it will blow up everybody's chance to get what they need down the road. And I think we need to be very careful about how we juggle those balls, because they've got high-powered explosives in them.
Anybody else want to take a crack at?
I think I just add, policy is key here. I think co-equal goals, but there's a number of other policies that are not talked about as much that are also in there that we may see as much impact from some of those, like reduced reliance on the Delta for future needs, those kinds of things. all those pieces, and public trust and reasonable use as the foundation of water policy, water management in this state. Those are kinds of things that weren't talked about, but they may turn out to be some of the key ones.
Just in terms of potentially explosive balls we're juggling right now, there have been several efforts in the last 8 months, 7 I believe at last count, to waive the Endangered Species Act in Congress as it applies to California's water projects. And you know, there have been, I'm sure, discussions about doing the same at the state level. If those efforts succeed, that will fundamentally undermine this notion of co-equal goals. You can't move forward on saying that water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration are equally, you know, important policy drivers, and pull the rug out from environmental protections when water supply is, you know, put in some uncomfortable positions. So I hope that those efforts continue to not succeed, because if they do, I think it really bodes well for implementing this legislation going forward.
All right, other questions? Ian, you've got the mic. You're the most powerful guy in the room.
What did the legislation establish as the baseline for determining the 20% reduction?
That's a more complicated question than you might think.
Have at it.
They're
Go ahead.
No, it's your bill.
It is very complicated. And, you know, there was a big debate about how do you not penalize people who have made an investment in conservation over the years. You know, the city of Los Angeles has grown by, I think it's 1 million people in the last 10 years, and its water demand has stayed constant because it's made a lot of investments in conservation. And, you know, people didn't want to penalize them and require those who are starting from a lower per capita water use to reduce by the same amount as those like the city of Fresno and Sacramento, who have very high per capita water use. So, you know, I don't think I can explain fully how you establish the baseline right now, but it tries to take into account some of those past investments so that it brings people down to a more equal level across the state.
As I recall, you have 2 baselines and 4 ways to comply with the 20% requirement. The 2 baselines are basically a 10-year historical average. I don't remember when the 10-year ends. Dennis, do you recall? But if you are heavily reliant on recycling water, I think 10% or more, then you could extend that 10-year base back 5 years or something like that to give you a little easier, a little lower hurdle to climb over. And then there are 4 different ways to measure compliance. Sound confusing to you? Well, it is. Well, I'll tell you where my organization is coming from. We fought hard to get the 4th option. The 4th option is something that says, DWR, let's work with a more flexible approach to get people a way to solve their conservation problems that's consistent with their local circumstances. And then we worked hard to get money in the bond to provide financial assistance so that a water district manager can go to his board and say, we're not doing this because they're telling us we have to. We're doing this because it makes business sense for us to do it. And over time, by the way, the 20% I think is going to be largely irrelevant. I wouldn't be surprised to see us go past that, because those local resources are the safest, best asset in an urban water agency's reliability portfolio. The LAs of the world are going to want to go beyond the mere 5% that the law says they have to do because it's in their interest to do so. And again, I think it's incredibly important that we develop as flexible a process as possible to incentivize conservation, because it is the most important water supply resource that we're going to develop in the future. But if you just go to my 450 local boards, all of them elected, they don't want to believe other people can tell them what to do, and you say do it because it's good for somebody someplace else, it's not going to get done.
Right, and I just wanted to follow on to say that probably the important dates here to keep in mind, according to the legislation, is that each urban retail water supplier shall develop urban water use targets and interim urban water use target by July 1st, 2011. And then there is some reference and stipulation to 55 gallons per capita daily for indoor use. So that's about as specific as I have been able to determine. I'm sure there's much more. See, there's more jobs for you guys. You can figure this all this stuff out.
And this baseline question that the questioner raises is hugely important, because one of the things I always enjoy telling Northern California audiences, who often and I'm a Northern California myself, we're very sanctimonious when it comes to water. The folks in Southern California are much better and have a much stronger track record of water conservation on a per capita basis than most of us in Northern California. Next question.
Olivia, do you want to? Olivia, do you want to get someone down there?
See that, sorry. Well, just continuing on the governance theme, I just wondered if any of the other panelists wanted to respond to Assembly Members Yamada's concerns about the appointment process for the Delta Stewardship Council and whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage.
Yes. And actually, I probably want to respond because I think this was a unique legislative process as well. Never have we seen the kind of long-term, over an entire year, the effort, and we did legislative work groups, we did more than a dozen hearings, we often had the Delta counties speaking first. We had a huge, robust legislative process. And yes, a lot of it was done also in negotiations as well, responding to the things that came out in those hearings. So just an opportunity to respond on that. But on the governance piece, yes, the key thing to point out is they require Senate confirmation. They're going to be appointed on February 3rd. The governor is gone on January 1st. They can serve up to a year. But if they never get confirmed, they're gone on February 3rd, if they're appointed on February 3rd of next year. And there would be, the new governor would have the opportunity to appoint it. So it depends on who he appoints and whether they, in the end, whether the Senate chooses to confirm them. That's going to be the key thing. Because if they don't, then they're there for a year and they're done.
I was the co-chair of Senator Simitian's stakeholder work group with Laura Harnish of the Environmental Defense Fund on governance. There is no perfect when it comes to governance. We did a governance bill in 2002 and discovered 5 years later we needed to change a lot. I'm guessing we will figure 5 years from now we'll be wanting to change what we're doing here. With that said, I do believe this is a move in the right direction. And I want to address it, and I'm probably with a little disagreement up here on the panel. I believe the current governance structure gives the Delta a lot of clout. I mean, they've got the only appointed seat on the Stewardship Council, and frankly, I have been advocating to the governor's office that they appoint very credible other people from the Delta's perspective to the council. I don't know where the governor's going to go. The Delta Protection Commission, it's got a lot of land use authority. I mean, it's not just a paper tiger. And it's controlled by the Delta Trust. The Delta Conservancy is going to be much more important than people might think. It's going to manage billions of dollars that will change land use practices. It's got 5 of 11 seats. And all that, and you've got this, sooner or later, the statewide water interests are going to get it. If they need to get what they want, there's a chain that the Delta folks better be getting what they want. And these two things have to happen together. I have been involved in many complex public policy negotiations in my career, and I wouldn't mind having their negotiating position at all.
Can I follow up on that question?
Okay, all right.
I think all of you are saying that Delta does need to have a greater say. And to my mind, the most discouraging thing about the entire process was not the lack of public hearings, but I was in fact 8,000 miles away when I learned that Lois Wolk was not part of the final negotiating committee, and the Delta interests were excluded from where the deal was really struck. Now, when Mr. Simitian first proposed a Delta governance, he had 9 members who were entirely Delta supervisors. I think most of us thought that's not going to work. But what you've got now, why do you think that's going to work? Why not a Delta council that has 4 gubernatorial appointees, 4 Delta supervisors, and they then pick, say, 3 neutral members, so that the Delta feels that they're not going to get rolled over? To my observation, we are seeing a replay where everybody gets respect except the area of origin, and it has never permanently worked in California. And so this is what I would put forward as the first item to bring in as a legislative correction. And so I'd be interested in whether that would be acceptable. Ms. Yamada, to your constituents, and Tim to yours?
Well, let me just respond to that quickly, and I'm very interested to hear what my co-panelists might have to say. You know, I think it's really clear when people are operating from a position of trust and respect, whether or not a specific set or subset of individuals is put on whatever body it is that's going to make a decision. You know, there are times in my role as a social worker in my career that, you know, I've had to make recommendations or decisions on behalf of a family or an individual or a community or a client that, you know, might think he or she knows what's best for them, but it may not be because they may not be operating with full resources. But I don't think that there's any deficit in, you know, professional credentials or in legislative creativity, or, you know, however you want to label this core group of individuals that really were, I think, given very superficial participatory rights in this process. And, you know, trying to clean this up now in terms of legislation, I don't think is going to happen. But I think I'm encouraged by hopefully what I'm hearing, at least here, that, you know, the fissures and the anger and angst, as I referenced earlier, that the legislators most affected are feeling now is not unlike some that is also being felt in some of the other communities of interest, in the environmental community, in the water community, in the agricultural community. So, you know, but it was very glaring, you know. And as a freshman legislator last year, you know, my first year in the legislature last year was sort of like a dog year, I think. I felt like it was 7 years later. You know, if this is, again, a symptomatic of, or a characteristic of what this process is going to look like going forward, then I have great fear for the future. But I haven't heard any, you know. I've received no overtures from, for example, the chair of the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, who holds a lot of power in this discussion. And I look forward to engaging in those discussions.
Tim, do you want to respond to Tony's question?
Well, I don't know, maybe it would have turned out different, my friend Tony, if you were there for the negotiation, but we got a law that's about to become effective. They're not going to change that part of it. If you look back at the California Bay Delta Authority, which I was a part of helping create, I was part of that negotiation, we built a body there that was built around the notion of a bunch of people protecting their turf. Bad idea, did not work. I like the model of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, which didn't have any real authority in this world, but changed the world. The same concept here is to get people who will think statewide. Their function is basically planning. They're not supposed to be implementers. They're supposed to be planners, and they're supposed to work for everybody, including the Delta. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm a champion of the Delta folks having more voice. This has got to be something that works for them as well as for the rest of the state. I believe we have a governance infrastructure that can take us down that path.
All right, we are the only thing that stands between you and your lunch. We're at the end of our time, so please join me in thanking our panelists. You want to give directions as to where you want people to go?
Thank you.
Olivia, yes, nice to see you again, yes. She was a recipient of the Steve Hall Scholarship.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
She came down to San Diego to receive.
We have 2 rooms where lunch is being served, and please be back at 1 o'clock because we'll be starting with Professor Leshy's panel on surface water governance.